All right, welcome. We are talking today about letter from a Birmingham jail, one of the 9 required foundational documents. And obviously, it is written by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's kind of important to note the date, not specifically April 16th, but 1963. Right, this is essentially the heart. This is right in the middle of the civil rights movement. So we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed, which obviously is greatly influenced by this letter, by this movement, of course, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and also the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So, all within, a few years. Okay, a little bit of background about this specific document, right? He is writing this to the clergymen, the people of the church. And basically, what has happened is they have begun to take direct action. The church, Martin Luther King's church, and the um, people of Montgomery, Alabama, and Selma, and other regions of Alabama, Birmingham, right, have begun to take direct action, right? Nonviolent action. It was started out as nonviolent, but often the reaction to their movement turned violent with brutality and force. So he's writing this to the clergyman. He has just been arrested. While in jail, he finds out that 8 clergy from the church had written a letter titled Unity, and basically it was bringing the white people, the white church leaders together to resist this movement. So he's writing it to them. So I'm going to highlight some of this. This is a lengthy document. It's a long letter, and I've kind of highlighted some of the key points that I think are important. I'll talk about those. I would encourage you to read the whole thing. It's really good. He has a lot of historical points. He often references historical leaders such as Socrates. Even talks about Jesus in here, Thomas Jefferson. So definitely take some time and read this and familiarize yourself with it. But I'm going to point out some of the key points. Okay, so he's saying, why is he here in Birmingham? Basically, the first paragraph he's listing the grievances against the city, right? He refers to it as one of the most segregated cities in the United States. And several months ago, the affiliate here in Birmingham asked us to be on call to engage in a nonviolent direct action program if such were deemed necessary. Okay? So he's going to go in and he's going to cite direct action, nonviolent direct action numerous times. This is what is happening. This is what they have come to, right? This is what they have resorted to. These sit-ins, these marches, these protests, these boycotts, right? And he's gonna justify why in this letter. He's gonna talk about why that's necessary, right? I think this is really important. I am in Birmingham. I am in Birmingham because injustice is here, right? There is injustice in this city. People are not being treated fairly. African Americans are not being treated uh, the same under the law, right? That laws are being applied differently, and there's injustice in this city. And he goes on to say, injustice anywhere, so injustice any part of the United States is a threat to justice everywhere. Okay, so it doesn't matter if it's in Birmingham, doesn't matter if it's in Montgomery and Selma, in any part of the South. Any injustice in any part of the United States is a threat to justice everywhere. And obviously, that's not what we want. Right? We don't want injustice. So it is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham. But it's even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative. In any nonviolent action, no, I'm sorry, in any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps. Collection of the facts to determine whether injustice exists, which you already said it does in Birmingham, right? Negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. We have gone through all these steps in Birmingham. Okay? And he's going to say, so he's going to respond to the claim that you should just wait, you should negotiate, try to negotiate. And he's like, we've tried everything, and this is the last step. Direct action is the last step, but this is what's necessary to bring about change in the South. Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. So they've already tried to negotiate. They've worked with the leaders. They've worked with the uh, southern leaders, the city fathers, the mayors, the governors. They've tried to negotiate and have consistently been told really to just wait and let the courts take care of it, which we'll get into here shortly. We realized that we were the victims of a broken promise, and this is what he talks about. He kind of talks about their negotiations and how they were promised certain things, and those things never happened, right? So, uh, direct action is necessary to bring about change. We had no alternative except to prepare for direct action, as he was saying, right? He's saying, look, we tried negotiating. We were told things would change. They haven't changed. They're not changing. We have to bring about direct action. We have to bring about these um, sit-ins and marches and boycotts and protests. You may well ask, he says, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You're quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. Okay, so instead of using negotiation, right, to bring about change, right, he needs to bring about direct action. Right, negotiation is not working. It's as he mentioned earlier, they've been promised things that have not been fulfilled. Right, there were signs, there was derogatory signs, and uh, on storefronts in stores that were promised would be took down and never got taken down. So this is why he's calling for direct action. This is why they are doing what they're doing in those southern cities, right, in those Alabama cities. The purpose of our direct action is to create a situation so crisis packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. If you don't want to negotiate with us, we will bring attention to the issue to force tension, to force, um, you know, uncomfortable situations, to force negotiation for change. This is our way to fight for change. One of the basic points in your statement is that the action that I and my associates have taken in Birmingham is untimely. This is what they were talking about in that letter of the clergyman, right? Why didn't you give the new city administration time to act? And he says, we have been waiting. We've been waiting for years. We've been waiting for, hundreds of years. And things have not taken place. Things have not changed. So while we're keep being told to wait and wait and wait, like we can't wait anymore. Now is the time to take action. Now is the time to pursue change, to fight for change, right? And it's all about they want equal rights. They want to be treated equally under the law. They do not. They feel that injustice is prevalent in the South, and it was, and they just wanted equal protection under law, right? The whole 14th Amendment, equal protection clause, citizenship, all that's being called into question. Like, why is that not happening in the South? We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Okay, so, and you can, again, pause this at any time you want, go on to read it if you want. But basically, what he's saying is, people aren't just going to give up their powers. People aren't just going to um, give up freedom, right? If you have freedom, you're not going to give it up. And that's kind of what he's saying is people that have freedom aren't going to give it up. And it must be demanded by the people that need freedom. That's what he's saying, right? I think that's a very powerful quote. People We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the press. Frankly, I have yet to engage in direct action campaign that was well timed. There's never good timing for it. There's never the right time. But no, now is the right time. Right? This is the right time. This wait has almost always meant never. Right? If not now, then when? It has to happen. We have waited, as I mentioned earlier, hundreds of years. We've waited more than 340 years for our constitutional and God given rights. Okay. So this you're telling us to wait, to let the courts handle, let the process take care of itself. This is not. It's not working. It's not happening. So we're bringing about change. Um, okay, so this is basically the injustice that they're facing. I'm not going to read all this, but he talks about his daughter and his son and why they aren't being treated the same. Why can't they go the same places that white people are going? And why do they have to sleep in their cars and not hotels? And this just brings about the whole point. Like, this is why. This is the injustice that's occurring, and this is the uh, mistreatment that we are facing to bring about change. Um, the, so he kind of goes on to talk about, like, why should we follow some laws and not other laws? Like, why is it okay that everybody should follow? And he even mentions the Brown versus Board decision, right? Why should everybody have to follow that law but not other laws? And he basically said there's two types of laws. There's just laws and there's unjust laws. And basically just laws are deemed acceptable by everybody, right? Unjust laws are basically immoral. They're immoral laws. They go against the moral compass of all people. Um, and unjust laws is no law at all. Two types of laws, just and unjust. Right? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. And these moral laws are just, right? These immoral laws, these laws that create segregation and create uh, unequal treatment, injustice, are immoral. It can be. Thus, it is that I can argue men to obey the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court, for it is morally right. It's a just law, right? Brown versus Board, which ends segregation, is morally right. And I can argue them to, I'm sorry, and I can urge them to disobey segregation ordinances, for they are morally wrong, right? Treating people differently is morally wrong, according to Martin Luther King Jr., right? One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. If you want to bring about change, they knew that they were going to be mistreated. They knew that if they were going to protest and sit-ins and marches, that they had to be prepared to face the retaliation. Right? Can you be hit without striking back? Can you do this in a nonviolent action? And that was the question he asked his followers. Um, so if you're going to bring about change, right, there's going to be conflict. There's going to be you have to be willing to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual breaks the law that conscience tells him is unjust, and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for law. If you want to bring about change, you have to challenge unjust law. And you have to be ready for the ramifications that are going to come from it, is basically what he's saying. And he goes on to talk about, right, what's considered right and what's considered wrong, what's considered just and what's considered unjust. And he brings up some specific examples here, right? What Adolf Hitler did in Germany was illegal. Technically, it was, according to German law, everything he did was legal, right? And the Hungarian freedom fighters, what they did in Hungary was illegal, protecting Jews, right? It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. I would have done what was just, right? What was deserved, what was right, not what was morally right, right? Maybe not legally right, but what was morally right. And this is kind of where he's talking about the just and unjust laws. If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocate disobeying the country's anti-religious laws, standing up for what you believe is moral and right. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill. So now he's going to start calling into question the Southern white males, right? He's going to say, there's people that discriminate, right? And but really, like those people are going to be those people. It's like the real problem are the people that are doing nothing. Like, why? How are you standing there and letting this happen? How are you standing there and not standing up for what is just, what is moral, what is right, right? So shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance, allowing it to happen, right? Allowing injustice to happen is much more bewildering than outright rejection. So he's calling into question the moderate. He even says the white moderates, right? That basically stand there and aren't doing anything. Um, okay, so he goes on to talk about um, what is right, and in your statement you assert that your actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because that our actions, talking about what he's doing, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence, right? They're bringing about violence, and he's basically saying you're punishing people for doing what's right. You're punishing people for standing up for what they believe in, and that's kind of backwards. You don't punish the person who's standing up for what's right just because it's bringing about other nonviolent actions, right? Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber. Um, and he goes on to talk about other examples here. He brings religion into it, and um, you know, just because people are standing up for what's right and the people are retaliating to them, turning it into a violent action doesn't mean that the people that are standing up for what's right nonviolently should be punished. That's not what he is arguing. He's arguing that you know it's turning violent because of the reactions to their movement. But people have to have a voice. And this is kind of like what he's saying in that whole uh, paragraph is you got to let people speak out. He goes on to talk about a little bit more here. Like there's two types of African Americans. There's the African Americans that's so segregated, so discriminated. They've just given up, right? And you can't have that. You got to allow people to speak out. You got to allow people to um, to talk about what is right. And if you continue to allow that to happen, there's going to be a lot of resentment amongst those people. Okay. I began, this is what he's talking about right here. I began thinking about the fact that I stand in the middle of these two opposing forces in the Negro community. One is a force of complacency. This is what he's talking about, the people that have just accepted segregation and discrimination, right? Injustice. I stand in the middle. One is a force of complacency. We're made up in part of Negroes who, as a result of long years of oppression, are so drained of self respect and a sense of somebodyness that they have adjusted to segregation. In part of a few middle class Negroes who, because of a degree of academic and economic security, and because in some ways they profit by segregation, have become insensitive to the problems of the masses. Okay, the people that basically aren't doing anything about segregation. The other force is one of bitterness and hatred, and it comes perilously close to advocating violence. And this is what he's talking about. He's talking about, if you continue to suppress these people, it's going to turn violent. It's going to turn resentful. You have to let these people speak out. You have to let the marches happen. You have to let the sit-ins happen. You have to allow for this, what he calls this tension, right? This tension to bring about change. Um, it's morally right. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. Okay? They're going to either be given their rights, or going to become so resentful, so bitter, right, that it's then going to become violent. It's going to become very violent. Negro has many pent up resentments and latent frustrations, and he must release them. Right? This is what he's saying. This is what I just was talking about. So let him march, right? Let him take out those frustrations peacefully. Let him make uh, pilgrimages to the city hall. Let him go on freedom rides and try to understand why he must do so. If his repressed emotions are not released in nonviolent ways, they will seek expression through violence. This is not a threat, but a fact of history. Okay? And then he goes on to talk about, you know, injustices, right? People that have stood up against injustices. And he even quotes, he quotes Jesus. He quotes John Bunyan. He quotes Abraham Lincoln. He quotes Thomas Jefferson. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Like Jesus was considered an extremist. Abraham Lincoln was considered an extremist. Thomas Jefferson was considered an extremist. So yeah, we are extremists. Right? What kind of extremists do you want us to be? What kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hate or for love? We will be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice. That's it. That's the key points. There's more to it. He goes on. There's a few more pages after this. I'm not going to get those. He starts to go into the religious aspect of it, calling out the religious leaders and the moral compass of religious rights. So I would encourage you to read this. Please read this. Please feel free to take more notes on this, because there's more to it than just this. But I think those are the main points that you need to understand and know for the test. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. You learned something. So keep working, keep studying, and take care of each other.